Hey, it's Fufu. And I'm going to be rating all of the PCs that I've owned. Disclaimer, this is only the desktops, not the laptops. All of that is going through another video. And that's a very long list. I might keep on talking about it for about an hour if I yap on when it comes to my laptops. First of all, we have the 2010 Windows XP machine. So, Fufu was a wee little lad. We didn't have that much money back then. So, this is most that we could afford. And it was also a starter level PC back in 2010. The specs are a 775 Atom, most likely the shittiest of Atoms, 2 gigabytes of DDR2 RAM at 800 megahertz, and 120 gigabytes of solid. Wow, no. Hard disk drive. There we go. It isn't even an SSD, it's an HDD. SSD 2010. Yeah, you wish. You wish, Fufu. So, this is basically the machine that I've discovered everything about the internet. I've surfed on Newgrounds, on Facebook, on YouTube, on Y3. There's too many sites for me to count. But all in all, what do I rate it? B tier. Why B tier? Sure, it introduced me a lot to the internet, but it was slow. It was a shitbox, alright. It was a shitbox. Plants vs Zombies walked at 15 FPS from what I remember, especially when it comes to the big boy scenes such as the rooftop. If any one of you have played Plants vs Zombies, the original one, if you have, high five. Going on a few years later, Fufu's family got a 2008 Optiplex 775. So I'm gonna be talking about the max specs that we had for each of the PCs. So the 775 at its peak had a Core 2 Quad Q8400, a GT730 DDR3, 8 gigabytes of DDR2 RAM at 800 megahertz, and a 70 gigabyte hard disk drive. All in all, other than its impressive specs, except for the HDD, it was doo-doo. It was doo-doo. It was very doo-doo. Mostly because of that HDD. Around 2011, people were starting to use SSDs at that point. It was still alright, but going to its end of life, which is about 2019, 2020, it ran like molasses from the HDD. Maybe because the HDD was failing. Most likely because it was failing. So yeah, I'm gonna have to put it on a C tier. It was great to mess with. It had a Core 2 Quad, had a GT730. You could run quite a lot of games on it. But at the end of the day, that 70 gigabyte hard drive is really pulling it back. And this boy really didn't help me discover the internet, so it's getting a C. Then we have my first personal PC. It's the 2015 Sigmatech Recon build. Oh wow, this is very nostalgic. Much more nostalgic than the 2010 Windows XP machine that I had. So it had a A8 7600, a GTX 550 Ti that was handed me down, 16 gigabytes of DDR3 RAM at 1600 megahertz, 500 gigabytes of hard drive space, 500 gigabytes, all in a Gigabyte FM2 Plus motherboard. All in all, yeah, it was decent. It was decent. The Core 2 Quad Q8400 most likely is better than the A8 7600. Maybe yes, maybe no, I'm not sure. But the 550 Ti though, that boy was a champ. That boy was a champ. I really didn't know how to meddle with PC hardware at that time, but I was kind of researching it, so I didn't have the balls to transplant the stuff from the 775 Optiplex to my Sigmatech Recon build. And yeah, I had to stick with what I had. But that 16 gigabytes of DDR3 RAM was quite great. It was quite great. Bad part is the power supply. The boy had some kind of generic 750 watt Sigmatech power supply, and that boy went up in smoke. But overall, how do I rate it? 8 tier. 8 tier. Why 8 tier? Despite everything wrong that's been happening with the Sigma Tech through its entire lifespan? Well, it introduced me to the world of content creation. So a lot of my first videos was made there in the Sigma Tech. A lot of karaoke covers was made in Sigma Tech, albeit with a shitty mic. 8 tier, 8 tier. Then we get to the 2015 Nexus M White build. Oh my god, what could I say about this? It looked great, but it was shit. It was shit. It had an A6 7400, 8GB of DDR3 at 1600 MHz, 1TB hard drive, and the same FM2 Plus motherboard. Well, not technically the same, we bought two of those. This 2015 Nexus M White build kind of was like, it was supposed to replace the Optiplex build or the Windows XP machine. It does, but for everything else, not that great. I put it on a D tier. Might be me just getting spoiled of the Sigma Tech build. Then, oh, Jeebus. This is the GOAT of the machines that I had so far. The 2018 Nexus M Black, the Techwear Nexus M Black build. Oh wow, where do I start? This was when I really was getting into content creation. This is what helped me through the beginning of the VTuber scene until like 2021, 2020, around there. It had a Ryzen 5 2600, ooh, Ryzen, an RX 580 8GB, 16GB of DDR4 RAM at 3200 MHz. Then we had a B450 DS3H. Then we had a 240GB Samsung 850 EVO. We now have an SSD, boys. We now have an SSD, and god was it amazing. I couldn't wait for anything anymore once I switched to that SSD. My god, it was so eye-opening. It's like breathing for the first time. It's like sitting down after a long run. Jeebus, pajeebus. Okay. Then I just yeeted the 1TB and the 500GB HDD from the last two builds. Mostly because I know tech by then. So it had about 1.7 terabytes of storage. Oh yeah, that 1TB is still sitting with me on the shelf, waiting to be used and inserted on another desktop, which I don't have any soon. This boy had a Seasonic S2, S2 power supply with 520 watts. Yes, it was a bit getting there, especially with the RX 580 and the Ryzen 5 2600. Yeah, I know. But it carried it. It carried it. It's just more ridiculous once I go to the final build. But yes, S tier. That boy was so stable. I even dropped coffee into the PC when I was collabing with some other VTubers back in the time, and it still worked. Then we get to my final one for this time. I guess it's 2024. I don't have any desktops anymore, so this one was the last one that I had. It lasted up until January of 2024. This boy was the H510 build. The NZXT H510. That boy was really suffocating. It looked great. The thermals wasn't. When you see it reach 80, 70 degrees, you're like, yeah, it does that. Well, what are the specs? A Ryzen 5 5600G, an RTX 3060 12GB, 64GB of DDR4 RAM, an ROG B450F Gaming 2, 500GB of SSD, which is the Samsung 970 EVO Plus, and the 1TB and the 500GB from my last build, plus another 1TB that I stole from another laptop. We'll get into that in the next video. Overall, it was great. It was much more powerful than my 2018 build, probably much more powerful than all of the desktops that I had combined. But it had one major flaw. It was unstable AF. It was so unstable. Why? The power supply of this build is a Corsair VS450. Yep, the original orange VS450. That boy carried the entire system. And it didn't do that much of a good job. That was an undersight in my on my knowledge. I mean, it worked, so I thought, it's okay. But no, it wasn't okay. It wasn't okay at all. A lot of people that know me right now would have the same opinions about when it comes to me and my PC. This 2021 H510 PC. It was unstable AF, kept on crashing no matter what I did to it. And it was a dumpster fire. No wonder why I sold it. So yeah, B tier. So will I be having a desktop in the future? Yes. Yes, I will definitely be having a desktop in the future once I saved up a heck ton of money for it. Probably $1,000, $600 to $1,000 around that. Mostly because the setup that I'm using right now has a Asus ROG G14, the Zephyrus G14, and it's great. You know, has the Ryzen 9 7945HS, nope, 7940HS, 64 gigabytes of DDR5 RAM, RTX 4060. It's good and all, but there's just some frustrating things making a laptop into a desktop setup. It's a laptop for a reason, not a desktop. If any one of you have a cool setup story to share, please let me know down in the comments below, and I will be commenting on them as soon as I can. So, yeah. This is Fuukattofumei signing out, and I hope you fellas have a very nice day, night, or afternoon wherever you are. Bye bye.